All right, let's continue here. D4, D5, C4, E6, knight F3. This is the most popular way of introducing the Catalan, although an immediate G3 is also not bad. Okay, so immediately G3 is not bad. On the other hand, knight 3, knight to C3, knight to F6, and only now G3 is considered less accurate because the possibility of playing knight on B to D2 is very useful in the Catalan. So it seems rather a pity to give it away so early. Okay. Knight F3, knight F6, G3. And chess.com calls it Queen's Gambit declined Catalan opening. This, the basic position of the Catalan, is reached via many roads. Perhaps the most common one is, let's take a look, D4, knight to F6, C4, E6, G3, D5, knight to F3. Bishop G2 is equally good. For bishop G2 is equally sound. It is likely to transpose after just a few more moves. And actually, this opening is called the Catalan Opening closed. Okay. The fianchetto, meaning flank development, for example, to G2, rather than somewhere on the F1 to A6 diagonal, the fianchetto development of the king's bishop is not intended to take immediate action in the center, nor is white aiming for any particular fixed pawn formation. It is chosen with the long-term strategic goal of putting pressure on the long H1 to H8 diagonal. This pressure is most likely to be felt when black plays C5, or when he takes on C4 at some point. In the latter case, white will in many cases regain the pawn with queen to A4 check. Let's see, so if black plays D takes C4, get queen A4 check. But sometimes a gambit will also be an interesting option. White then allows his opponent to keep the pawn on C4, hoping to use whatever means black employs to protect his booty to his own advantage. This could work along the lines of black plays bishop B5 to protect his pawn. On C4, white attacks at B5 with A4. So for example, if white ignores it, and let's just say this plays knight to F3, they could play B5. White can attack B5 with A4. Black covers B5 with C6. White intensifies the pressure with knight to E5. Black blocks the H1 to A8 diagonal with knight to D5. White attacks in the center with E4 and possibly D5. Black's options against the Catalan can roughly be divided into 3 variations. Notwithstanding the above, he may try the fourth move, C5, or D takes C4, because these moves are part of the fundamentally sound strategy of undermining white's central position, no matter what reason white may have for allowing them. So for C5, will normally transpose to a Tarrasch defense after C takes D5, E takes D5. Okay. Whereas on the fourth move, after black plays bishop G2, instead of C5, but after, so for D takes C4, has a great number of sub-variations that will be examined below. The third option is simply to continue development with bishop e7. All right, let's continue on. So this is called the open Catalan. So let's do our move order. We got d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, g3, and d takes c4. This is called the open Catalan, and what does chess.com call it? Queen's Gambit declined Catalan Opening. Now white can win back his pawn by playing queen to a4 check. Black then has knight on b to d7, queen takes c4, a6, preparing to meet bishop g2 with b5, queen c2, bishop b7. By putting his bishop on b7, Black neutralizes any pressure the bishop on g2 may exert. Now all he needs is to achieve full equality is to play knight on b to d7 and c5. To prevent this rather straightforward scheme from happening, white usually prefers a more pointed move. All right. So after d takes c4, instead it's just bishop g2. This is called the Catalan Opening closed. In this position, Black must lay his cards on the table. Those who feel like challenging the validity of white's last move will consider b5. Black walks into the scenario which I have outlined above, but if he is aware of the dangers awaiting him, this is a valid option, a6. Is a slightly more cautious move, based on the same idea. Black delays the weakening, b5, until white is castled, or a more cautious still, he may prefer, assuming white castles, knight c6, then perhaps b5 won't even be necessary. All right, so 5, knight to c6, is often played with the same idea in mind. Now after castle, rook to b8, Black has simply economized on a6, which is very nice. But there's also a disadvantage. If white plays 6, queen to a4, so instead of castling, queen to a4, Black is neither in position to reply bishop b5, nor can he achieve the freeing c5 easily. All right, so knight c6, let's just go right to c5. c5 is based on a totally different view of the situation. Black is not concerned with keeping his pawn on c4 at all. He is concerned with attacking white's last remaining stronghold in the center, the pawn on d4. After 6 castle, Black knight c6, white has to play very aggressively in order to keep his chances of an opening advantage alive. Critical are 7 queen a4, with the idea of if c takes d4, knight takes d4, exclamation point. Queen takes, bishop takes check. And the pawn sacrifice, 7 knight to e5. So that's one option. And the other one, instead of queen a4, is the pawn sacrifice knight to e5. All right, so the fifth move is bishop d7. Instead of c5, let's do bishop d7. It prevents basically queen a4 check. Okay. And aims to complete the bishop's development with bishop c6. The alert reaction knight to e5 is probably critical. All right, let's go ahead and continue. We got the Catalan variation. Let's go ahead, d4, d5, c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, g3, bishop e7. Priority is given to completing the development of the king side. Naturally, taking on c4 remains an option. Bishop g2, castle, castle. Black now faces the same choice again. D takes c4, c5, or something else. Which is best? Let's take a look at c5. c5 is again very likely to transpose to a Tarrasch after c takes d5, e takes d5. There's also the closed Catalan, where black develops his queen side without either taking on c4 or playing c5. This idea may be pursued with either knight on b to d7, for its sixth move, let's see. Instead of c5, we do knight on b to d7, or even c6. The two moves often transpose. An important scheme of development is to play b6 with an eye to developing the queen's bishop to b7 or a6, depending on where white puts his queen's knight. For example, knight c3 leaves c4 undefended, which makes bishop to a6 an attractive option. All right, so let's take a look at this as if it actually is being used. So go back. What we'll do is see c6. Important development is to play b6 with an eye developing on a piece. All right, so let's just say that we play rook. Let's say just play e3, for example. What's the top moves here? Queen c2, knight to c3. All right, let's just do a random move here. Let's see what the plans are. So b6. So if knight to c3, that means bishop to a6 puts more pressure on the pawn. Okay, we see that. After black completes his development, for instance, bishop b7, knight on b to d7, and rook to c8. The liberating c5 comes into view again. Another idea is to play c6 followed by b5. White's main plan is to open the center by playing e4 at some point. The open Catalan approach is still available, although taking on c4 now is very different from taking on c4 two moves ago. In fact, d takes c4 is one of the most popular ways of meeting the Catalan. The idea is to counter the plausible queen c2 with a6. This leads after queen takes c4, b5, queen c2, bishop b7, to a type of position that we have already encountered in the 4 d takes c4, queen a4 check variation. Yep. Again, black is aiming to complete the development of his queen side by playing knight on b to d7 and c5. White has tried to prevent this, or at least to make it as unattractive as possible in numerous ways. The most direct being 10 bishop f4, and also bishop d2. Knight on b d7, bishop a5. Still, hundreds of games at the highest level have shown that white must be a supremely good positional player to squeeze any advantage from this line. Many players consider this sufficient reason for preferring the more robust 8a4. At the price of a certain loss of flexibility in his queenside pawn formation, white stops b5 altogether. Black now has to look elsewhere for a way to develop his queen's bishop. The most popular solution is 8 bishop d7, which is very solid. Now 9 queen takes c4, bishop c6, leaves black with a little less space, but well developed, and knight to e5, knight. That's what I'm practicing. Knight takes d. All right, hold on. The most popular solution is 8 bishop d7, which is very solid. Oh, instead of queen takes c4 for white, it says knight to e5 immediately. Knight to c6. And also held up well in practice. The same can be said about 7 knight to e5. So instead of queen c2, here 7 knight to e5. What does chess.com call this? Catalan Opening, open defense, classical line. The surprising reply, knight to c6, has taken the sting out of this seemingly very logical move. In a very unorthodox way, black gets some nice open lines for his pieces, both after knight takes c6, b takes c6, bishop takes c6, rook to b8. And also after bishop takes c6, b takes c6, knight takes c6, queen to e8. So 7 knight to c3. Well, instead of knight to e5, knight c3. 7 knight c3 is the sharpest approach. White makes no attempt whatsoever to get his pawn back and simply intends to play e4. This has been investigated far less deeply than the more cautious queen c2 and knight to e5 lines. Well, excellent. That's the end of the variations for the Catalan. See you in the next series where we look at the Slav and the semi-Slav defenses.